Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dragon Prince video. This is going to be my thoughts on The Dragon Prince Book 5 Ocean. So obviously it released a little bit earlier than planned. They kind of dropped it alongside the Comic-Con panel, which was kind of exciting. But unfortunately, in terms of my coverage on the channel, it's coming in the middle of a lot of Avatar stuff that I kind of do need to cover. So I wasn't really able to do my kind of usual coverage where I'd kind of like give my thoughts after each group of episodes. Instead, this is just going to be my overall thoughts on Season 5. So full spoilers here. We're just going to get straight into the sort of more finalized discussion. I have managed to watch through the season twice already, so I think I'm basically prepared. So in general, my thoughts, I think, very similar to a lot of other people. I think Season 5 was an improvement over Season 4. Now, after my first watch through, I was like, this is a vast improvement, huge, like this maybe one of the better seasons of the show overall. After the second watch, my opinion on it kind of came down a little bit, and that doesn't typically happen with kind of second watch throughs. Usually I'm able to see a few more connections, but this time out I think I made a few more almost like negative connections, because I think the important thing to realize here is that this directly continues on from Season 4. So a lot of the issues that Season 4 started with and presented, this continues with. It has to continue with those plots that we criticized with Season 4, and even though we get to kind of better sections of these arcs, they are still kind of arcs that we're not the most happy with that they're actually doing. So I still maintain it is better than Season 4, but I don't think we have got back to the quality level that we had hit at Season 3. And in a way, that's what really comes across here, is that, as I kind of, I think, mentioned with Season 4, it felt like it was the show almost kind of restarting again, rather than being this amazing kind of evolution. Like a time skip can often be a really good way to evolve the show to the next level. I felt like the time skip was one of the worst parts in terms of execution in Season 4, and in a way continues to be here, where, you know, all the extra stuff that they have up on the website, those short stories, it's cool that they're kind of fleshing out bits and pieces with those stories, but there's definitely a sense of some of this stuff should be in the show. Now, the show has done, I think, a decent job about referencing a lot of the kind of key elements from those kind of short stories, but there's still the big thing of, like, you know, Rayla's kind of journey on her own, abandoning Callum, and how that kind of, that shadow of like that event and what she did looms over the entire season. And there's a bit of a just weirdness to how they're approaching it, even if it leads to some relatively kind of interesting kind of character moments between everyone. But all of just that stuff, you know, like constantly remembering that, oh yeah, the mistakes of Season 4 kind of seep into Season 5 a bit. And then just the sense that, like, we are now halfway through the mystery of Aravos, and it still doesn't feel like the pacing is kind of right there. That in 2 more seasons we are going to have to resolve all of these open plot threads, and that includes actually activating the main plot of, like, I suppose, freeing Aravos at some point. And it's becoming more and more kind of I think a lot of people are becoming more and more worried that, are they going to give themselves enough time to actually explore Aravos once freed, and kind of having a build and a really nice kind of strong kind of resolution. And that's where I'm not entirely sure I necessarily have that confidence, in that there's a lot of stuff. The scope of the show is kind of becoming relatively wide, even though there's still some complaints I would have about a lot of stuff not being explored, but there's much more characters, much more plots kind of coming into play. And I'm not sure they quite have the time for everything. And so a lot of elements, I think, of the season just in reflection, like that second time through, just makes me kind of have more doubts. And a lot of the stuff where I was maybe more just excited to see for the first time, I'm brought back down to sort of earth with the second viewing of, like, oh yeah, it's still a season of the Dragon Prince, with this kind of, in a way, relaunch post time skip that we have here, where there's quite a few problems. And so I want to jump in with what was ultimately one of my main complaints about season 4, and it kind of continues here in season 5, and that is just the sort of the theming of the season around one of the types of magic. So in season 4 it was Earth, and I complained quite a lot about how the Earth aspect of season 4 was not done very well. Like, it just wasn't explored. Like, I didn't feel coming out of that season like we gained any particular insight or knowledge from a world building or character perspective, really, about the Earthblood elves. Obviously, like, you know, Terry is kind of like our main Earthblood elf, but like, because his arc is so focused like on Claudia, it didn't feel like it was the most amazing representation of, you know, that kind of culture. And then we got the Dragon Riders thing, but it was like 2 or 3 people, and it was just like, wait, is there no Earth like main city town? We're not going there, we're not addressing that. Is that not important? There was just a real sense of like, Xadia kind of, after season 4 and 5, is beginning to feel quite small and not really fleshed out, because what happened here in book 5, Ocean, yes, there were some elements to make it ocean themed, in terms of like, Callum learned a new arcanum, we had some stuff at sea, pirates, we met like a few tidebound elves, but once again, we didn't get to see like the main civilization of this group of elves or anything like that. It felt like almost like an effort was made to specifically not cover that. Now, I get it. They had a more specific plot here, but this is where the overall plot of the show is beginning to hold it back in so many ways. And I think that's probably one of the other main issues, is just the core plot being effectively a MacGuffin hunt race. Turns so many elements of the show into forgettable things that we have to address very quickly and move on. Like Domina Profundis being in the opening episode, and then just getting a reference later on with the pirate captain guy in terms of his backstory, wasn't fantastic at all. That like one of the archdragons is just a here is my plot based role, goodbye. That's completely it. And to a certain degree, that's exactly how Rex Igneous felt last time out. And it highlights that some of the other dragons are just so much more interesting. Like Zubeia feels like a character because we actually like explore stuff with her. And even Sol Regum, like coming back to him a little bit in this season, like feels like more of a character than some of these other ones that are just like, we're not really planning to do anything, but here they are. So a lot of that stuff I think does need to improve to just like assist the world building of the show overall, to make it feel like a proper kind of world, because, you know, they did that work in the first 3 seasons with the human side of the world, where we met the rulers of a bunch of the other nations, and even though we maybe haven't gone to these places or anything like that, there was at least a clear sense that that is the case. Whereas in terms of Xadia, I don't know if it's a point that they're making here about how kind of free and open everything is, but there feels like there's a weird kind of like lack of like any sort of like politics between different groups of elves and stuff like that. And like I said, I don't know if it's just, are they trying to highlight that as a human trait, where there's this kind of all this kind of politics, kind of Game of Thrones type stuff going on, whereas the elves and stuff like that are fine to just live in their own kind of specific area, and that's that. But it's becoming more and more clear that the world just doesn't feel as amazing as it does. Like, the exploration and the cool aspects of Xadia just don't feel as strong as the potential kind of was. Where, okay, Luxaria, cool. The Sun Elves are where we're getting the exploration of kind of all that sort of stuff. We at least addressed the whole idea of this is where like the Moon Elves typically kind of come from, but we're not focused on that. But I don't, in a way, like that there's just a sense where everything about sort of like the relationship of Xadia with humans is trying to be encapsulated in the Sun Elves and human plot. And we did it to, I think, an okay degree last season. This season, they didn't really explore those elements. It felt kind of much more internal, but because it was very Sun Elf internal, literally like a squabble between like brother and sister, it doesn't help with the world building or anything like that, because it just feels like there's an inherent like disconnect that we only ever see like a random one member of this kind of race of elves, and then here's a random member of this other group over here. And like I said, it doesn't have to be crazy intrigue and politics, but I'd like to know a little bit more about it, because it almost feels weird that there almost like isn't that much of a dynamic when, like, say Rayla meets Akiyu, Tibentina, whatever you want to call her. It never gets addressed or brought up that they're two different types of elves, or if there's like any dynamic between the two of them. It's just like, okay, that's fine. And it's more the human characters being like, oh, you're a different type of elf, as kind of the point there. So that's just, I think, the example of some of the kind of broader scale world building, I think, not particularly working, where they're doing the basics, like the bare minimum of like, they're aware they need to utilize the archdragons that they actually have in play, even if they're not going to do anything too crazy with them. They're at least including like a character or maybe two characters of note from that specific like race, but it doesn't really help with, I think, what they're maybe planning to go for, with some sort of a peace to a certain degree being achieved between both sides of the world in the aftermath of the kind of Arvos crisis. Because if they try to build up to some sort of a, it's a united effort against whatever Arvos's forces are, I don't think we've built up enough of a knowledge of like the different peoples of Xadia to know like who the leaders really are anywhere. Because like, it's super clear, we have a really good understanding of the Sun Elf stuff, because we've seen like multiple kind of like queens, we've seen some of the internal workings and politics, but a lot of the other stuff is just like, if we happen to pass by, we'll maybe address some of that, and that's really it. So that out of the way, let's get into some of the more kind of plot focused stuff. So this season, what we do is it continues on, like I said, it's the race to the next stage of the puzzle. Now, technically, this is effectively the end of the race, because it is finding the location of Arvos's prison. Now, the situation we have is, of course, Claudia, Terry, Viren, they got the map, which was the clue from Rex Igneous on his tooth, which was, they have the map directly to the center of the Sea of the Castout, which we knew because you could see the map pretty clearly. So they're there. And the heroes the whole time through are thinking, they're 10 steps ahead of us. They will be there in no time. They might already be there. But they don't know that Viren is basically comatose like most of this season. So he is slowing them down greatly. So it actually ends up being a situation where the heroes end up arriving like just before the villains do. So that at least was like okay, but it certainly highlighted the contrast between sort of the way the two journeys were paced, where yes, there was some strong character stuff with like Viren, but Claudia and Terry, I didn't feel like had a lot to do for most of the season. They were just, and we're still going down the river to get to this next location. And here's another more light-hearted, fun scene, which I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to contrast, and they've been doing this since the start on this side of the story, contrast the idea of, like, in a way, if Terry wasn't there, Claudia would kind of almost be in borderline like free fall on a path, on this dark path. He keeps kind of like bringing her back to her kind of more usual self, but you can see there is this kind of core conflict over, whenever you talk about the kind of lengths that you will go through to save your father, you kind of become someone that I'm not sure I particularly like. And you're kind of waiting for maybe like Terry to kind of just kind of, say his piece a little bit more and kind of stand up in the whole overall situation. And I think that's where they're going with it now. Like where Claudia ends this season, it kind of feels like Terry is going to be kind of important to what's actually happening here. So like, it's not that there was nothing there. It is just a case where they probably overly focused too many of those scenes on them dancing in front of Viren, and you know, the homunculus is there, but also that thing isn't important for like the entire season until like right at the end, where they do a kind of like weird reveal that is still sort of like, okay, and so there's that contrast. And then the hero's journey, where at least they went to a few different places, but it also sort of highlights in reflection that like, oh, this is also like they actually traveled a bit, but it's still a rather mundane journey that they had, where you know, they go from where they were to the library at Luxaria. So like the two kind of hero kind of groups kind of meet up, have the Luxaria scene where they just basically go to a library, and we're there for a while. And then we pretty much head out to them finding their way to the Sea of the Cast Out. And it's just like, okay, this is fine. But they focus on like the pirate aspect of things. And I get it, like this was an attempt to explain a little bit about what Rayla was doing. Like if you've read the recent 3-part story on the website of Rayla basically visiting Skumport before, this is what's being referenced in those episodes when she says she's been there before. And that's a nice enough connection. It's just, again, the time skip has been poorly executed, and I think the incorporation of extra material in with the actual show hasn't been particularly well done overall. But you get the pirate thing, and then that adds in this whole other plot, and like it's just like the heroes get more sort of like hurdles thrown in their way on their journey, because ultimately if their side of the story went as smoothly as possible, they would just arrive at the prison like so much longer before, so much earlier than Claudia would. And it's not that these elements like I think are bad, because I think you get some very strong character moments out of like Rayla and Callum meeting up with Amaya, and so on. Like that is very, very strong, like when you finally get those kind of moments, because that's where we get probably one of the better moments in terms of the whole Rayla Callum dynamic and how they do it here. Like when Amaya at first apologizes to Rayla for basically their initial meetings in like the earlier seasons, and how, you know, her own relationship with an elf has changed her mind completely on elves, and she apologizes to Rayla, but then is like, but as Callum's aunt, I have to, you know, criticize you for hurting my nephew. That wasn't good. Like, you need to address this, basically. The problem was that they ultimately didn't have Rayla actually talk to Callum after this. There is a weird thing with this kind of the way they're approaching doing this, where they don't want to overly sort of criticize Rayla for her actions, but you kind of have to. And Amaya doing it felt like one of the only points where that happened. And that combined with Callum being like so nice and understanding about it, just made it to be like a little bit of a weird arc where it's like, well, if this is the case, just have them get back together. But they seem to stop short of just quite doing that, where yes, we still got moments where we showed their connection and how kind of strong they are together, that the relationship, you could almost say, is back together, but they just haven't spoken about like it being back, and that they're past what happened. And that's what made, like, on their side of the story, their characterization, it made, like I say, the first 4 episodes feel a little bit weird, where you still had Rayla, like, kind of doing stuff behind Callum's back, but like feeling the need to steal the key to get into the kind of Viren's kind of secret cellar. I didn't get, like, after everything that happened, after the, she returned, expected everything to go back to normal, didn't get that, why she still leaned in the direction of like doing things in secret. And then, like, I get it, like, Callum was never going to be like, yeah, you should go to jail for what you did. He's obviously going to get her out of that situation. But he is, I think, in this situation, played as being, I think, overly like, yeah, it's fine that you're kind of going through all of this. And I get it. It's kind of like giving Rayla the space to, in her own time, come to him with kind of the problems that she actually has. But it's like, it's ultimately like it's this forced situation where, like, I wouldn't necessarily call Rayla someone who is just inherently bad at communicating overall. So, like, you didn't need to have her disappear for 2 years and it be such an extreme of, like, she left a note behind, like, on Callum's birthday and left like that. And we still haven't properly seen, like, a full-on, like, apology as such kind of on her side of things. And I think they're building up to it. It's just, why is it taking this long? And it's just that they've committed to it. And even though people aren't super into it, it's an arc that they just feel they have to go along with, even though they probably should just commit to and make it happen again. And it's the thing of, like, almost this weird sense of, like, they feel they can only get these moments if they put drama and obstacles in the way. But it just speaks to, like, you don't know how to write a couple that is good, still learning about each other while their relationship remains positive. In that you could still have little moments of, like, issue between them while their overall relationship is still, like, together and stuff like that. But the fact that they felt the need to, they've been apart for 2 years, big drama wedge inserted into the relationship, and now go. And we're still basically not addressing most of what happened here, because it's a weird one, because like, we also open up on kind of, like, in a way, a monologue of Rayla talking to the coins with, like, her parents and then Runan in it, and, like, how this is the thing above most of all, she wants to do this, she's making a promise, she will free them, but she hides it from Callum for like 3-4 episodes, and then when she does reveal it, he's like, oh, I will help you. And it's the only explanation is just the very basic point of, I thought by hiding it from him, I was protecting him. When, like, you're in a relationship, he wants to help you, of course. Just let that happen. And it's not that it's this huge moment of growth for Rayla. It's just, you wrote Rayla in that moment to be like this when you didn't need to. And there is a few moments like this, like, Janai, in terms of, like, forbidding them from going to the library in the first place because of the whole corruption situation. Like, I get it to a certain extent, but it's also like, here comes, like, the drama writing ultimately. Now, they get around to it in a decent way where, like, basically Amaya ultimately agrees with them, and so she goes with them, and the agreement is sort of made in that way. But again, it's just like, can we just get to that understanding, like, initially, and not have Janai need to be kind of portrayed in that way earlier on? Bits and pieces kind of throughout the season like that, I think, were, frustrating overall. But in the library, they're there because they feel like, well, if they're so far ahead of us, they're probably going to get Aravos out. So let's go to the complete next step. How do we deal with Aravos once he's out? How do we kill a Star Touch elf? And we get some kind of interesting stuff here, where apparently there is a record about the first elves, that one of them was killed by a special sword called the Nova Blade, I think it was. So we need to get this. And that also coincides with what Callum found out in the library about how to undo the spell with the coins, which he framed as, what did he say about it? It is a spell to sort of, like, give people their bodies back. So it wasn't just a direct like reverse spell. It felt like it was this weird thing where like, do they need new bodies to be like almost like constructed here? It's not just like if you undo the spell, they're out. So I'm a bit confused about like, wait, like, is it just their spirit trapped inside, or is their body trapped inside? Like, what's the dynamic there? Because we also, of course, got the reveal earlier on in the season that Viren's mentor, Kapar, or Kapir, is in a coin as well. Now, admittedly, I think we pretty much only really have information on that dynamic because we know the Puzzle Box graphic novel that's coming out, next week, it does feature Kapir and stuff like that. So we found that out, and part of Viren's kind of like visions involved in interaction with his old mentor. So that's fine, but again, it was sort of just this plot point where we got that, we sort of addressed it a little bit, and then we never actually got around to, now we'll do the spell. Now, admittedly, I think I understand why, because Callum mentioned that what they needed to do this spell was a Quasar Diamond, which is it's a special sort of gemstone that contains the magic of it's the primal stone for star magic, whereas otherwise, like, I think Stella is pretty much one of the only like things that we've seen introduced that actually has and utilizes star magic. So there's a need for a source of star magic, of course, because I'm guessing the idea is that there's some sort of a very weird thing surrounding the arcanum of the star, and that if Callum is going to learn all of the arcanums, star probably is last on the list. But sounds really interesting, certainly. So that's something for the future. They mentioned like we're going to go to this area where there's going to be a lot of sky elves. What do they call it? The sky. It wasn't just skyscraper, wasn't it? Like it's star scraper, wasn't it? I think it was. So I guess that's a location that we're going to have to go to. Will it be next necessarily? Perhaps. It's a weird one because obviously we end the season with them actually getting the prison, which I don't think they were expecting to do. But they're probably still going to want to get the weapon that can ultimately kill Arvos if he eventually does get freed. But the ending of the book here is surprisingly like positive, and it feels like we have for the most part kind of averted catastrophe here. Now, obviously, there's got to be some sort of a turnaround because of the way they did some of these plots, like the politics in Luxaria, or really like the Sun Elf / human camp and what's going on there. But there's not immediately the kind of instantaneous threat of, and the prison will be taken by this character or that character. Because like the Claudia Terry Viren situation feels like they're gonna be stuck for a little bit. There's gonna be no instantaneous, those characters are gonna get the prison in some way. So unless it's gonna be some weird situation where the heroes simply taking the prison out and freeing it from where it was underwater, it puts it at risk because Arvos has some influence on the physical world, and I'm not particularly sure kind of how immediately he's going to be freed, because we've seen that with characters like Kimdale, the Blood Moon Huntress, like that you can get to kind of anywhere you want with powerful enough characters, but her arc seems kind of also mostly kind of, I wouldn't say like her arc is resolved, but it's like I guess she will come back into play in some way, that because of how we resolve that standoff, there is a way to manipulate what characters are in a specific position to give her an advantage and actually force a situation for her that could work. Because I'm guessing they're more or less setting up the idea of like potentially like if Amaya was ever captured, maybe this is where Janai would be forced into a situation where she would free Kim Dale from her kind of what way did they phrase it? It's effectively like a spell curse that like attaches her to the royal family line. Overall, it was an interesting explanation. Again, there's also a short story online that goes into the details of this, of like when it actually happened in the first place with Aditi. Which, while I think of it now, I should mention this. We apparently got the reveal about what Aravos said to Janai's sister as he killed her about what happened to Aditi. Now, this is a weird one because Janai couldn't possibly have heard this, but it seemed like it was framed in this way to actually give us the reveal of what was said. But I think it was like Janai just heard this in her dream or nightmare. So what is the situation here? Is this what was actually said, or what? I feel it was there to be a clue. And he says, I swallowed her. Now, what does that mean? Because what adds a lot of confusion to it is, of course, he's a star elf. And ultimately, these star powers relate to stuff like, you know, gravity, black holes, even what Stella can do of having the different kind of like pocket dimension effectively to put stuff in. You would say that Stella is quote unquote swallowing in a way the stuff that she's stealing throughout the season, which was a little interesting thing to note, that, you know, in the background, even in the front of specific scenes, Stella's just like tossing lots of little bits and pieces into storage effectively. And is any of it important? You're not really sure. But again, the whole idea that Rayla has an animal that is connected to star magic is very, very interesting. And it feels like it's more than just for kind of like mascot purposes to have a unique kind of animal here. So I'm wondering what the whole idea here is, because I think everyone was expecting like the key of Aravos, the cube, to maybe come a little bit more into play. But like, did we even acknowledge the existence of that like this season at all? The cube? I don't think we did. And if it means anything necessarily. But, you know, maybe I'm just misremembering a specific kind of plot point there. Yeah, the library also led to what I thought was a relatively tense scene. It felt like the characters were at risk of, like, if they even receive a single scratch, they will be corrupted. Of course, you know, like, not all the main characters are going to get got. But there was quite a lot of tension here because, of course, you know, the wedding is on the horizon. So Amaya being out there and then being put at risk, you kind of felt like there's a chance they do a kind of a surprise character death or something like that. And then especially when they added on top of that, like Corvus in the middle of all of it, kind of falling down with Amaya, and they did the whole, you know, it was an honor to serve alongside you. But they got out of that by the setup of the book drop being sort of a kind of almost armored kind of fortress, like was mentioned. So they got in there. That was actually a nice kind of subtle little moment of writing, how like this seemingly random reveal about one of the side characters ended up saving the lives of kind of two of the more important characters. So that was kind of an interesting one. And I like that they didn't overly tease you with the idea of like, are they dead? Are they not? Like ending the scene with like, oh no, we're a little bit more relieved because at least we saw them get in there. They will probably be able to survive until the morning and the kind of infection kind of goes away. So that was interesting. But the character who did get corrupted by being cut was Zubeia, the Dragon Queen. So this ended up being... it was a character exploration in a way, a little bit, of like she hides it. Again, for such a important character, Queen of the Dragons, like why does she hide this when people could have helped her? It allowed for an interesting exploration of like her having the kind of fever dream vision kind of final talk with Abizandum, and it was a nice scene kind of with him kind of just ultimately being like, you need to fight this. You need to do what you can to help, Zim and go forward. Like, you are still needed. You can't just let yourself be corrupted and die here. So she misses the pickup on everyone. So which that forces them to have to get a ship. Now, Zubea's arc basically gets resolved at the end by her encountering a mushroom mage in a forest who uses some crazy mushroom magic to cure her in some way. I'm guessing it succeeds because it seemed like a very powerful healing spell, and it was a direct counter to what was going on here. It seemed like they were very much going for the idea of like, the corruption is some sort of a like directly like death magic. It zombifies whatever it takes over, and then that is countered by a very life, true living kind of thing style spell. So that sort of fit to a certain degree. Will they explain the whole situation here? Was this just like an accident? Did Zubea specifically seek out this person? I'm not specifically sure, but it seemed like it was kind of a relatively direct resolution, in that I'd be surprised if like the corruption with her is still like a thing going forward, but I don't think it was the time to get rid of her as a character at all. It would have been, kind of a needlessly tragic thing to do, like for Zim, who, obviously he didn't get too much focus or anything like that, which is, in a way, is a bit of a unfortunate thing with the show. It's called The Dragon Prince, and since season 3, it feels like Zim hasn't been like incredibly important. His inability to speak, unlike other dragons at the moment, because he's young, is a bit of a problem, and they probably need to get that sorted sooner rather than later, so he can truly be a character rather than just like a mascot. So stuff like that does need to be addressed. It would really, really add to things if Zim could actually kind of talk like other dragons, because Zubea, being friendly with everyone and being around everyone a lot, allows for some very fun scenes, like the scene with Soren being like, you need to get that checked on. Like, he really cares about her in this situation, and Zubea's just like, what are you, a dragon doctor? But she calls him like sweet human, basically. So, Soren's characterization, even though there was nothing particularly serious or of note with him this season, I suppose outside of the young Soren inclusion in some of Viren's visions, I just think I like where Soren is as a character. Like, you can see he's just completely kind of come out of his shell, being on the kind of good guy side of things, and in a way like away from the drama of his family. But of course we know there probably is still going to be some sort of a big, like, Soren has a conversation with his sister, and if they're going to do anything more with Viren, there's probably still something to be said there. But he, of all of that family, seems to have earlier than anyone else found his place, made the right decision, and kind of removed himself from the drama of like the dark path that a lot of them were kind of like heading down. And he has now gone to being one of these characters who has, I think, really benefited from the whole like interaction of like human side of the world in Zadia, where he actually seems like probably like he has one of the best relationships with dragons in general, just under Ezran, basically. So that's that's a really good position, I think, for his character. And admittedly, I think most of his main character arc is probably done with what they did kind of in season 3 and then where he's started out season 4 at. But that is the situation there. I should probably get into the internal Sun Warrior plot here. So, Kareem gets banished after what he did in last season. And he's just exiled completely on his own. Some of the soldiers are kind of, I suppose, needlessly over the top, where they don't even let him kind of keep a ring that like his mother gave to him, and so he's exiled effectively into like the desert. But the mage guy, Pharos, I think his name is, follows him and is going to kind of help him. He sees Karim as being the true kind of leader that the Sun Elves need. But the whole time, Pharos is hiding the kind of corruption or infection from Erebos. And this is obviously a setup for this group, which where we end off is that Karim's core plot fails, but because his girlfriend betrays everyone and brings a lot of the army with her, he is now in control of a pretty large portion of the kind of Sun Elf kind of population here. But I'm guessing this is the setup for when Erebos is freed. This will be part of like his forces, his army, because he can use Pharos to like take over in some way. I'm guessing that's why this is a arc that has continued this long into the show, because I don't think, if it's literally just meant to be Sun Elf politics, and it's not related to Erebos at all, I'm a bit confused as to why they're focusing on it like so much. I get it, it's meant to be the main kind of human elf conflict, but I would definitely say this season, I really don't feel they brought up the whole human aspect all that much. But I get it, a lot of the people who are on Karim's side aren't super happy with the human connection, but the people who have stayed behind seem to be getting on fine with humans. And I don't know, it's an interesting dynamic, but again, I wish more of the different populations of elves were involved in the whole human elf relationship dynamic going forward. Right now it mainly seems to sort of be like dragons and sun elves as being like the focus of what we're doing here. So there's that. How this resolves itself. So Karim decides he is going to involve the Blood Moon Huntress in his plot. This is how he will get control. He will get the Sun Seed and use this to sort of like rebuild their civilization effectively. And he has to get this from his sister. And obviously this is a bad move here because Kimdale is this legendary kind of evil villain in history, and they actually give us a bit of the backstory here of like she is a moon elf, but this is like a sect of moon elves that has taken to using this kind of dark power effectively to live longer than anyone else, and this is why they are known far and wide as being this massive problem. Obviously they kind of more or less get across the idea that it was the dragons effectively grouping together to kind of take down this kind of powerful force, but Kimdale is more or less the last of them. It gives context to the short story on the website that the reason she came to Aditi was more directly to like avoid being taken out by the dragons, and it was that sort of protection, which explains the story a little bit better overall. So that context was reasonably nice. Now, obviously, with Kimdale, what we get here is a level of violence that we've seen before, but like it takes it up to kind of the next level compared to a lot of what we're kind of dealing with. Like she is a character who just will kill people no problem, and the violence does go through the roof kind of every scene she's in. She seems quite a bit more powerful than so many of the characters that we have encountered here. Really the only weakness that she seems to have being the kind of connection, the kind of necklace thing that connects her to the royal family, where she owes them a kind of mercy debt effectively. And obviously we end up finding out that Karim thinks he can free her from this because he's a royal family member, but it is revealed that it is only the acting ruler at the moment, who can actually choose to free her from this. So it was always in this case Janai's decision to make, and she of course refuses to do that. And obviously by the end of it, what we get to is that they stop Kareem's plot. In that Amaya is able to kind of ride out, take out Kareem basically, and then get to the situation where, you know, if you kill me, she'll kill my brother, and you will die, because if there is no one to resolve your debt, you will die. Because I think in the short story they do explain that that is the case. Like, you can't resolve this by just killing me, killing the person who is the queen or king, and that will result in you dying as well. So this is what resolves it, where she knows that she'll die if she goes through with this, so she actually leaves. But because of where we sort of end, it sort of opens the door to Kareem kind of doing some interesting things, where it's almost like what determines, in terms of this kind of pact, who the ruler is. Where, like, if Kareem ends up in a situation where he is the kind of leader of technically more of the Sun Elf population than she is, who is actually the rightful ruler? Because, like, of course, she would never have given it up, but if more of the people decide he is their ruler, that makes him king all of a sudden, and then he can more control kind of Kimdale. So I'm wondering how she comes back into play necessarily, but they seem to be continuing with this plot, because his girlfriend betrays Janai, brings the army with her, and they have the Sunseed now. So it seems like there's quite a bit going on there. But like I said, I do think the setup on that side of things is probably more for the for Arvos to actually have a army effectively when he eventually breaks free. Otherwise, it's just him. Like, it's him and maybe Claudia, depending on what specifically they do. This probably brings us into the pirate plot, which obviously is just initially to get a boat, which eventually they do get because they find the pirate captain from like previous seasons, and that's kind of fun. They introduce Nyx at this point as like a co-captain here. Her utilization here in this kind of new position didn't feel like super incredible, but she's a fun enough character where, like, I didn't mind having her around, but it wasn't like hype. The Nyx scenes were like incredible. It was just like, okay, cool, she's here as well. Okay. Otherwise, it was mainly just, trying to find someone else before that. Ezra does go to bargain with the person who basically rules the place. This pirate, what's his name? Finnegan, I think it was. And he's an interesting character because he's actually like, here's a Tidebound elf and Tidebound elf mage. A Kiyu, I suppose I'll get back to the whole like a Kiyu bit with the whole jailer. That was kind of interesting, but the pirate stuff is kind of an odd one because it is very much like a side story in all of this. That just, when this gets resolved, they're just like, oh yeah, and I happen to like basically direct him to go in this way, so we're actually here. And it's just a coincidence of like, oh yeah, we just happened to resolve this issue right before we get into the main plot. But anyway, a lot of this ends up kind of coming down to Ezra basically steals, 3 baby glow toads from Finnegan, and that's what causes him to give chase. Again, there's a couple of like interesting things with the setup of like, they do immediately establish the dynamic with Deadwood and how he's constantly insulting him, even though he's his like most loyal kind of like almost second in command guy. That one gets resolved like okay, but the setup I don't think is incredibly strong. When Soren starts angling into the idea of like, you don't have to listen to him, look at how he treats you, I didn't feel like there was a particularly great amount of setup ahead of time with that. But for the level of kind of villain that we were dealing with for only being in the show for a couple of episodes, I found it to be like relatively okay. Obviously, like, the setup for how this specifically is happening isn't great, but like, once we finally got into the idea, okay, we're at conflict with some pirates, the kind of ideas that we were exploring I thought were actually pretty interesting in that like this is effectively what starts Callum's arc with the kind of ocean arcanum. He mentions he's done research into all of them, so he knows the theory, I suppose, effectively of all the different types of magic, but he has to have like an emotional kind of connection to all of this to actually properly try and unlock it. It's almost weird in a way that the show up to this point has only had him unlock one arcanum, and this is the second one here. But as we'll see, there's a very interesting reveal about, I suppose, the uniqueness of both situations. But obviously with Finnegren, his whole thing is that like he's about control. But Callum and the kind of poem about the ocean, that's the contrast that's made in the end. He wants to effectively control the entire sea, and he wants to do this by killing Domina Profundis. So he ultimately takes interest in Callum because Callum is a mage, a human mage, so he can be a dark mage. Why can't you not perform the same spell that ultimately killed the King of the Dragons on Domina Profundis? Now, there's a little bit of an emotional dynamic here where he says like his previous giant crab was effectively killed by Domina Profundis. So that's a part of why he wants revenge. But his whole thing is about control, where it's revealed that the reason he has control over the whole pirate town, as well as his whole crew is that his unique kind of spell as a ocean mage is effectively the ability to, what is it? It's kind of like pseudo bloodbending from Avatar, where in this case he freezes the blood in his kind of crew or anyone who opposes him's body, and this obviously causes them to completely freeze it up. It's a terrifying, painful experience. We see it happen to Rayla. It looks absolutely brutal, and this is just this thing that it seems effectively uncounterable. So Callum, of course, doesn't want to use dark magic, but he seems like he's effectively forced into a situation to where he has to do it. There's a somewhat interesting moment where they counter the idea of just like, I'll force you to do it by threatening harm to your kind of friends, but they're all like, I'll volunteer to have my hand chopped off because I don't want that person to have it. And that distracts everyone enough that they get past that whole idea. But eventually, after like an initial escape attempt, Callum is just kind of locked downstairs. And when he turns up later, it's just like, wait, how did he get out? And you only get revealed right at the end that like, oh yeah, he did actually use dark magic. The same spell as before, turning chains into snakes. But obviously it was dark magic literally just used to escape. And obviously it doesn't have the same impact because, of course, we actually got it clarified here that like the whole coma from dark magic only happens the first time you use it. Otherwise, when he actually arrives out on deck afterwards and he gets hit with the freezing spell, he breaks through it because it's the moment where he unlocks the ocean arcanum, accepting that it's about like the hidden depths that you can never kind of fully explore, accepting that you can't ever have like full control over the ocean of the tides, and it is about kind of in a way like flowing with them and where they're going, and that's what it's all about. And so that is a weakness that he has, trying to force this kind of philosophy that is actually the complete opposite of control into being about control. And why someone who doesn't agree with that, why kind of Callum can break through and do the spell to kind of cancel it and win the day effectively there. Now, admittedly, like he doesn't actually win there because like Finnegren still has the most kind of physically powerful kind of guy under his control in Deadwood. But this is where Soren kind of turns him. I didn't mind the intent of the scene. It was just like very sudden and quick of just like, this is how we're resolving it. His name's actually Elmer. He is upset about being constantly just insulted. And we just reversed the situation like that. So I guess we have another kind of allied character here. It seems like Nyx and the pirate captain and the other captain take control of this ship, and I guess we can use this to go on water if we need to at all times. because Finnegrin is basically killed by Elmer kind of dropping him in the water, and the Leviathan, I guess, killing him. So, reasonable resolution here. Do I mind Callum unlocking another Arcanum? Not especially. Like, I think the philosophy was reasonably well done. Like, again, do you need to have every single time he does this, it be this kind of super crazy monumental moment where it's this soul searching thing? Or can it just be like this, a moment of like true understanding in opposition to someone who, like he says, was born with this understanding of the Arcanum, but has grown to try and morph it into something different. I thought that was actually quite interesting. But the big reveal, of course, is that he did use dark magic. So this moment of almost triumph of, like, in a way, him thinking he's almost unique because he is the only human mage to unlock Arcanums. But now it's almost a realization of, like, wait, both times I've unlocked an Arcanum, it has come after I've used dark magic. So the first time it was after, of course, he was in his coma after using it for the first time, and he awoke from it with the Sky Arcanum. This time he uses it below decks to get out, and then above decks immediately afterwards he unlocks it. So it seems like humans can theoretically unlock an Arcanum once they're maybe magically charged by using dark magic, which is the kind of one thing they can use kind of by default. It's a bit of a kind of, I suppose, sad point for Callum kind of to know that, like, it is this kind of fundamental thing of, like, a human still requires, in a way, stealing magic from actual magical creatures to, in a way, activate their own magical powers. It is a bit different, though, where like, of course, like, Callum compared to Claudia, whereas, like, Claudia, when she uses more powerful, and Viren, when they use more powerful dark magic, have to sacrifice, like, bigger and, like, more kind of sentient creatures to do more and more powerful spells. Whereas Callum has unlocked 2 entire avenues of magic by just using a very simple dark magic spell twice, where each time he's effectively only killed like a slug type thing. Now, obviously, the show isn't, I guess, trying to justify dark magic in this way of just like, it's fine because it was like a bug that, like, you killed both times. But it does speak to a little bit of a difference, and, like, I wonder, is it almost like that the case, like, you have to use dark magic and then you can unlock an Arcanum, or is it actually maybe just a coincidence? Because, like, I think they could go either way and have Callum go down this path of, like, okay, I seem to know now that I can actually unlock the other Arcanums if I understand the Arcanum and then just do a dark magic spell beforehand. Or will they actually go down the road of being like, no, it just happened to be a coincidence that you used dark magic both times beforehand. This is actually a true way for a human to unlock magic. I'm not sure which way they'll go with it. The dark magic being required for the Arcanum is an interesting approach, but probably needs a deeper exploration. But it speaks to the idea that, like, say, Arvos as well, he has all 6 magics as well. So why does he have that? Is that just something special with Star Touch Elves? But again, he's Star. He should be mainly connected to Star. How did he get the other ones? That's interesting kind of by itself. And especially with, like, the kind of reveal towards the end of, like, okay, here is the spell to fully revive Viren. And it's Arvos actually telling Viren himself. And it's very interesting that this is told to him himself, and it's not done through Claudia, like, that Arvos wants Viren to do this himself. It's the name of the final episode, was it Infantis Sanguine or Sanguine? And it's effectively that for you to live, you need the blood of one of your children, of a child. With the implication being that, like, it has to be your child specifically. But Arvos says, no, I don't expect you to have to kill Claudia or Soren to do this. Our child. And it's a bit like, wait, what? But no, this is the explanation of the homunculus, that it is effectively this kind of being brought to life by a combined effort of Arvos and Viren. And so this is what's planned to be sacrificed to revive Viren. But Viren, after everything he's been through in his kind of visions this season, doesn't even want to do this. And this is what's very interesting with kind of the way the kind of villain characters end the season, is that Viren seems to choose to not do this at all. Even though it's this random thing that we don't particularly care about, has effectively done nothing, he still doesn't want to kill it to survive because he doesn't want to be used by Arvos anymore. And I'm guessing he thinks it's some sort of a trick, that this will just accelerate Claudia down some sort of a path if this happens, and he's just unwilling to interact with it. But it also feels like I don't think that's it for Viren. There's obviously a few hours left before the sun comes up and it's the next day and he's kind of scheduled to die. But I feel there's more to it here, that this was, I think, meant to be kind of part of a sort of redemption for Viren, that he has finally rejected Arvos in this moment. But what does it mean necessarily? Because I feel like they almost bring up the spell because it's going to be used at some point, but I'm not sure if there's any other like character where it fits, where like we're just going to suddenly get a situation where like, oh, and this character will gain extra life or be brought back to life by their child dying, and there's not many kind of characters that can really fit. So I don't know, it's very interesting, because then that puts the homunculus in a weird position where like it isn't really a character so far. So what's it there for? Now, obviously, they seem to have made the decision they're not planning to kill it, at least right now. So what are we actually kind of doing here? And it maybe gets into the idea of like, you know, when this thing, it's already kind of grown into this. When it kind of grows even more, might it be able to speak and have a life of its own? And what does that actually mean? Because if it is literally meant to be a true kind of living being that is effectively some sort of a child of Viren and Arvos, that would suggest it is a character who has some of the potential traits of Viren and Arvos. So maybe the power of Arvos combined with, as we've seen, the, you know, Viren as he maybe used to be. And there's maybe some use for the homunculus in terms of like being this surprise entity in all of this that could turn the tables on Arvos, because the people who were meant to, you know, kill it to gain extra life chose not to do that. But again, it just speaks to like, I think the ending is in a little bit of a confusing position. Even Claudia, like, even though I think she's in a very interesting spot in her character development, you don't really know what way it's going to go as things end. So the final confrontation effectively here is this underwater fight between Ezran is down there, Callum is down there, Rayla eventually gets down there, and Claudia, who has basically used a dark spell using a purple pentapus, Avatar reference, to be kind of part octopus. And the result of this is that Rayla cuts off one of the octopus tentacles, but when the spell wears off, this results in Claudia has lost a leg. So it is this major loss for the character here, where she feels she has failed and that like it's everything at once here. Her father is about to die here. She's just had this major conflict with people who she used to be very close to. And she's lost a limb now. Like, this is what this path she is going on has taken from her. And in a way, this is a major part of what has informed Viren's thoughts on everything and why he is the way he is now, is that he now sees the true error of his ways is less what he's done to himself and the path he has ended up taking, but more so that he has propelled Claudia down this same path by introducing her to dark magic, and now the path she has gone on to try and save him, that seems like the final thing that he has to do, is to stop that path for her. So I don't know, like, what way they're going to do it here, because if Viren is just like dead, say like we start the next season, Viren has died as we get to the next morning, Claudia finds out, it's a very emotional thing, she and Terry goes off. One way that goes is she now wants true vengeance against the likes of Ezran, Callum, and I suppose especially Rayla, for what happened here. And the death of Viren just furthers that. Now, the thing that has been driving her down this path is trying to, like, of course, save her father. You could also say that with the plot of trying to save her father gone, what does she do? If she doesn't go immediately for revenge of, like, you stopped me from saving my father, what is her arc? It feels like Arvos wants to use Claudia because she is theoretically now is more powerful, and especially I think now that Viren has fully rejected Arvos, and I think they're gonna stick with that. That would seem to be the approach here of, like, maybe Claudia is maybe ready to also reject Arvos, but this is where he now has the ability to come in here and manipulate her more directly, take control of her, and that's maybe what we're going to be doing, having this thing where, because of kind of Claudia's like strong emotions about the situation, she quote unquote falls to Arvos, but is like trapped kind of within him, or like in some way, and that's kind of what we have to do. We have to kind of fight to separate Arvos from Claudia, and we kind of do some sort of redemption for her character at that point. Because I absolutely think that that's what we're trying to go for. There might still be a step darker that Claudia is going to take in her arc, but I think we're eventually going to have the turnaround happen. And it's just interesting about what way they do it, because I do think you need to have an emotional moment between Claudia and her father. Because the one thing about season 4 that I thought was actually good was, like, early on in this kind of trio's journeys, you very much got the impression that Viren was kind of like, you know, what if we just spent this time together, the last 30 days that we have together, and we just let that be. You don't focus your life on trying to, like, save me or fully revive me. We just enjoy the time we have left and let it be. And she really was not willing to listen or hear that. And so that's kind of the flaw of Claudia in this. You understand why she wants to save her father, not to lose someone else effectively. But she's also, it does seem to be the one thing almost holding her back, is that she kind of becomes this different person in her efforts to save people, even if it kind of goes against the wishes of the person she is trying to save. And that's kind of the point here of, like, in a way, will she finally listen to her father's own true thoughts on the situation? And what are we going to do there? Like, is that going to be something that happens early on in this book? Are we going to have, like, some sort of a thing where Arvos maybe gets out and influences Claudia more? Or is Arvos kind of done with that whole family, and we just maybe have this final moments of Viren, he also abandons Claudia, and it's just Claudia trying to figure out what does she do next? That might be an interesting option, as he maybe focuses his attention on using maybe like Kareem, Pharos, and the like betrayers effectively of the Sun Elves, using them to sort of free him from his prison. Because that's the kind of plot point, is that we end the season with our heroes in possession of the kind of pearl that is Arvos's prison. So what's the deal here? Is there a secret to unlock it, or do you just, like, crack open the pearl and then he's out? What's the specifics here? Now, obviously, anyone trying to come after it either won't know that they have it, or doesn't know what the prison itself is. But that's where it kind of gets a little bit tricky, and, like, I don't really know what, like, angle they're going to take on that, really. Akiyu, I suppose we should go back and discuss her. Tideband Tina. She was fun for the little bit we got to spend with her. Of just like this kind of crazy old lady style thing, but then also like I was involved in like one of the biggest events in the past era effectively, and the story with the whole jailer thing was very interesting because like just by itself, like, ooh, there's this super important character who organized all of this, like just referred to as like the jailer, who had more control over this situation than anyone else, including the Archdragons. Like, who was this person? Was it another Startouch elf? Something like that. That would maybe make a little bit of sense. But obviously we know the clues were broken apart. No one knew every single part of the puzzle. But Akiyu was given kind of like one thing to do. Like she was tasked with making the prison. But as the jailer left, she happened to spot the location as well. And that makes her dangerous because she knows the nature of the prison along with where it's going to be placed. And this was apparently a bit of a problem, forcing her to make a deal that was basically like, I will put my life on the line to save this. I'll do everything I can to protect it. And if it requires it, I will die before giving up the information. So it leads to a fun scene where she basically she pretends to kill herself, but then as she's dying, they're like, but wait, other people are ahead of us trying to find it and they know where it is, and she just gets back up. So it was a funny scene, I think, overall how they did it. And I think that is the kind of point with the season overall. Like there's a lot of like what way to say this? It is one of those seasons where there's a lot of good points. There's a lot of like nitpicks that I think when you throw them all together, it makes the season maybe come across like all of these things together is not great. But it's also not that like it's awful or anything like that. It's not that all of those nitpicks come together to just make it like terrible. It's just that the writing quality overall isn't quite where it was before. But it's like, we can get there if you just find a way to resolve some of these more frustrating kind of maybe character-based plots. And especially now that it feels like the MacGuffin hunt style stuff is done, we can finally just focus on like, this is what is happening here. Like there's some sort of Sun Elf stuff going on here. We'll address that. I guess someone is going to come after the Pearl, the prison, and there's the emotional drama of like whatever's going to happen with Claudia, Terry, Viren, with like a few hours left and like Claudia missing a leg. What direction, what approach will she take? And then what actions will Arvos take? Because it seems like he fails. He was expecting Viren to make the choice. Viren didn't make the choice. Is he going to give a similar choice to Claudia? Where does this leave the homunculus? Arvos's plan? What is the idea, the intent here? I'm not really sure. Plus, all these extra plot threads that are still open. It's just like, when are we going to get time to do the going to the Star Scraper? I'm guessing just the fact that it seems like a very positive ending for the heroes, where they don't know a lot of other details. They might just be like, we actually have time now. Like, we've got a bunch of people looking after the prison. It's hidden. We can go now on our separate personal mission to resolve the stuff with the coins and Renan and your parents. So we can do that. I think that's definitely a possibility, and I think that's something that should happen. It just almost feels like a weird thing to do. Like, are we just going to have Renan and Rayla's parents back at the start of season 6? It almost feels like that's something you wait until late final season to do, but who knows? Overall, who knows what way an exact approach they will take with this. I suppose Viren's visions, like I mentioned a few of them. So Kapar was mentioned. We got a little bit of backstory, like what Viren came from a lower kind of upbringing or something like that, and so the fact that like he finds himself in this position where he's super high up the chain is a surprise to a certain degree to Kapar. otherwise, like the stuff about like kind of little Soren, where like we've got bits and pieces of that puzzle of like this is what kind of almost scared the wife away, was Soren being sick, effectively on the verge of death, Viren using dark magic to cure him, but this being this kind of like crazy thing. She left, and this has of course had an impact on Soren as well as Claudia, and that's definitely part of it. I think, like, you know, the reason Claudia, I think, is the way she is about making sure to try and get her father back is in part because the mother left in the way she did. So that's going to be interesting if they address that, because they made a point here of like not having Lissa be in Viren kind of vision quest thing. You get to see Harrow. You get to see a younger version of Viren, and I thought it was a reasonable exploration of just the idea of like, these are these villainous kind of acts that you have committed. You have gone down a dark path, and he's basically given the choice of like, do you justify it or do you take a different approach? And he seems to come out of it realizing that I made the wrong choice, and that choice has led to Claudia being in a terrible position. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Let me know in the comments if there were any plot elements, character arcs that I didn't talk about in the video that you would like to hear about. But for now, that has been my kind of initial video on the Dragon Prince Season 5. I'm not sure if I'll do another video or not, because I feel like this kind of covers quite a bit of it. I'll certainly do a review on Puzzle House when that graphic novel comes out. My copy shipped, so it should be here in the next couple of days. But I'll do a video on that when it arrives, and like, of course, when Season 6 starts to happen, I will do some sort of a video coverage of that. But yeah, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were yourself on Season 5. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.